Hello everyone and welcome back at the European Parliament. It's very good to have you together with us today. Also because we're starting a new project, the Hybrid European Democracy Festival, in collaboration with our partners from Estonia, our friends from the Didi Foundation. Today is also a very interesting day because on one hand there is a celebration in Estonia, the Independence Day, which is absolutely wonderful. But at the same time, 2 years ago, on the exact same day, something terrible started. Do you know what I'm talking about again?
Has it already been 2 years?
Yeah.
You know how time flies. Well, for those of you who are a little lost about what we're talking about, on the exact same day of the independence of Estonia, 24th of February of 2022, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia started.
Yes, that's right. It's quite crazy to imagine how the last years have been quite terrible over there. But this is also a great moment to reflect on what has been done by the European Union and on what are the next steps. And I think I know exactly with whom we should talk about this. Do you have any clue?
I have some ideas.
Right, so let's go. Ms. Kaljurand, first of all, many thanks for accepting our invitation to join us for an interview today, and especially because this is quite a timely moment. The 24th of February, that's quite a significant date, especially in Estonia. This is the Estonian Independence Day, but at the same time, 2 years ago, something quite terrible happened on the exact same day. That was the beginning of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And 2 years after these events, how do we look back at it and what should we do next? This is something that I would like to discuss with you today. Because we're talking about Estonia, I would like to start with this question. What is exactly the perception of the Estonian people when it comes to the security of their borders after the beginning of the Russian invasion in Ukraine? Do they feel secure? And especially because Estonia is a member state of the European Union, but at the same time the so-called periphery of the EU. What could the EU do more for Estonians to make them feel more secure?
Well, thank you for the questions and thank you for having me. Yes, you're right. The 24th of February is a difficult day for us. On one hand, we want to celebrate, and we will celebrate, our independence, but we will celebrate it in a geopolitically very difficult situation where we know that Ukrainians are still dying on a daily basis, not only soldiers, but also civilian population. I visited Kiev, Irpin and Bucha 1 month after the war broke out. And of course, not only on this day, but since then, I will never forget it. And in this parliament, I will keep raising the question of supporting Ukraine until the victory of Ukraine and the conditions of Ukraine. As to Estonians, well, I have to start from the history. We were part of the Soviet Union. We were occupied by Russians from 1940. We regained independence in 1991. So I would say that our people were never naive about Russia, about Russia's ambitions, about Russia's imperialistic views, and about Russia's intent to influence neighboring countries. I was Estonian ambassador to Russia from 2005 to 2008, so I've seen how Russian propaganda works. I've seen how Russia tries to interfere. It was the time when my country was presented as a Nazi country, and I was presented as an ambassador of a Nazi country. So once again, I'd like to say we are not naive. Unfortunately, some parts of Europe, majority of Europe, was very naive when they were hoping to have friendly relations, partnership relations for Russia. So what's good at the moment is that the wall has fallen, and we see the real face of Putin, of his regime. As to the security situation in Estonia, I think it's a mixed question. On one hand, as I said, we know Russia very well. We know that we have to be ready, if not for a war, and we're not talking about war on our borders, but for any hostile acts that Russia can do against any of the EU member states. You mentioned EU, but cornerstone of our security is NATO. So as we are members of NATO, we know that we have to take care of our defense, but also the collective defense. Article 5 of NATO is crucial for us. And just to say and to give an example of our commitment, Estonia has been for years among the few who has committed 2% of GDP to defense. Today it's even higher, but for years we were doing that, while not all NATO members were doing that. And that's something that I expect also from the NATO EU allies, NATO European allies. Please do your share. Please do your share of collective defense. Please rise your collective defense expenditure to the agreed 2% of GDP. That's the only way to win the war for Ukraine and to bring Putin's regime to accountability.
Well, absolutely. I do believe so as well. And now, speaking of security, you pointed out at NATO, but what is your stance on the future of a European security policy in light of this conflict between Russia and right now aggressing Ukraine, but tomorrow maybe acting like that towards any other member state of the European Union? What do you think of having a common European security policy?
Yes, I think that if we want to confront possible challenges, possible provocations, we have to be strong and we have to be united and we have to speak in one voice. And I think that we also have to pay attention to what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. We've heard the words from one presidential candidate, Trump, who said that he's encouraging Russia to attack NATO allies and European countries who do not fulfill their commitment. And that's something that is hurting everybody's position. But for Europe, it's something nobody could say. Nobody, never should encourage Russia to attack anybody. That's just not allowed, that's not right. But for Europe, I think it's time for us to look into the mirror and finally say that we have to be able to secure security ourselves, with or without the United States. We can't only rely on the United States. We have to do our homework and we have to do as Europe. And one of the questions is the decision-making process in foreign policy, decision-making process in human rights questions, sanctions, where I'm a supporter of qualified majority, because unfortunately we have seen how one country can stop or can postpone foreign policy decisions made on sanctions or aid to Ukraine.
Well, I think that would be quite important to see that happening in the future. At the same time, you were also pointing out at the Russian propaganda machine during your time as ambassador in Russia. You know very well how this machine functions, and now after the beginning of the Russian aggression in Ukraine and with a new wave of rise of disinformation campaigns targeting Baltic countries, what strategies do you find appropriate to counter the Russian propaganda and ensure the resilience of democratic institutions?
Well, I can't say that Russian propaganda towards the Baltics has increased significantly. I would say that the Russian propaganda and Russian information operations are happening everywhere. We're today in the European Parliament. And when I sometimes listen to my colleagues in the European Parliament, they sound like Kremlin. And then I wonder, are they just stupid or are they useful idiots for the Kremlin regime? So I don't want to say that the Baltics are being targeted more than other countries, but Russian propaganda has been efficient. They work with their own population, they start with kids, I call it brainwashing. I saw how they brainwashed their first graders, second graders when we were depicted as a Nazi country. They were bringing their kids to our embassy in Moscow, they were showing our embassy and telling the kids how Nazis work in this embassy, who want to kill their fathers, their grandfathers, their brothers. So I've seen it working. As to information operations targeting Europe, we have tools. I think there are social media platforms have their role to play, but I'd also say that each and every person has their role to play. Just think a little before you start sharing information you receive. Look at the sources, whether those sources are reliable. Look at the substance, essence of that news before you start sharing. So yes, we have Eastern Communication Task Force, which is doing excellent work, which was started in 2015 by 5 countries, including Estonia, which is working with this information. It's important to show the sources. It's important to be open and public about this information, and it's important to provide fact-based information. But once again, I also think that each and everyone among us should do their role in not becoming a tool in the hands of Russian propaganda.
And again, speaking of tools to counter disinformation and perhaps even more damaging effects, now we're talking about sanctions perhaps. How do you assess the effectiveness of the current EU sanctions against Russia in deterring further aggression in Ukraine and also promoting a way out of the situation?
I support sanction policy, there is no question about that. But the question is, what are the sanctions about? What are the sanctions about and how they are implemented? As to the sanctions, European Parliament was the first institution in March 2022 to ask Council and Commission to introduce 100% ban on energy supplies from Russia. Ursula von der Leyen was speaking to the European Parliament, and the question was, is it doable? And in March 2022 she said it's difficult, but it's doable. And here are we today. Where are we today? There are countries that are still importing LNG. There are countries that are still dependent on Russian gas. There are countries that are building nuclear energy powers with Russians. I'm not going to name the countries, everybody knows them. But really, I can say, well, I was thinking about Austria, I was thinking about Bulgaria, I was thinking about Hungary. And it's really embarrassing. So I think that on one hand we have to look into the substance. Now we're talking about the 13th package of sanctions. We can do 100 packages. But if they do not stop trade with Russia, if they do not trade, aluminium trade, if they do not stop import of energy sources, it will not work as much as it can work. And on the other hand, there are so many exceptions. Whenever we start discussing the sanctions package, there are countries who are coming with exceptions. And then the question is, what's more important for you? To get this exemption or to save 100 Ukrainian kids who are being killed on a daily basis? For me, that's an argument that I just can't understand. And I also do not understand the European companies who are still operating in Russia. Yes, I do get that they have their business plans, they don't want to lose their money, but that's only money. That's only money, even if we're talking about huge amounts. Look into the face of the Ukrainian women, kids, and tell them that we continue operating in Russia. So the sanctions policy should be there. It has to be much better focused. It has to be much more better implemented, and we have to become serious about European companies working, and we have to become serious about third countries who are assisting Russia in circumvention of sanctions.
Yes, so it should be less about the money and more about the people. And speaking of people, and speaking of citizens as well, what concrete actions could European citizens take if they want the EU to have a more active role in the defense of Ukraine?
I think citizens can do a lot. We are proud to live in a democracy. We are proud to live in free countries. Each and every person can do a lot. Approach your governments. Approach your politicians. Come to the streets if necessary. Come with Ukrainian flags. Do not let Ukraine be forgotten. Even if you reside in Belgium and you are not Estonian or Latvian or Lithuanian, do not let Russian regime be aggressive. Do not let Putin escape without accountability. The war has to end with Ukrainian victory, and Putin and his criminals, they have to be taken to justice. So do not let your politicians get tired, and do not let fatigue fall on Europe. Keep the Ukrainian flag close to your heart until the victory.
Ms. Kaljurand, thank you very much for these extremely inspiring words. It was a real pleasure to talk with you about this, and I have the same conviction as you. I'm sure in the end this entire story will end up with a beautiful victory on the side of Ukraine and on the side of democracy, on the side of citizens. Again, many thanks.
And I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank you for doing it, and I hope that there will be many young people who will listen to you, who will join you in the future, because the future is so much also in your hands.
I also hope to see you in the future again in the European Parliament, because I think the work that you're doing here is absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
And yes, let's see you around. I think these were some very inspiring words that we heard from Mrs. Kaljurand, and perhaps the most important part was really the call for action on the side of the European Union. Right now we're right at the hemicycle, the place where we should be seeing the members of the European Parliament taking the decisions. It's quite empty at the moment, but let's hope soon they will come back and take the decisions. What do you think?
In my opinion, I mean, that was the best point she made, actually, to make a call for action, because in this very same building we have seen so many inspiring words, so many people speaking about the conflict, but we have not seen that much of action. So yeah, maybe it's the moment for them to take the place and take a step ahead.
Let's see. But in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe to our channels, and see you next time.